Today we're here on the channel. We're going to show you guys how this Dragon Ball Z inspired energy ball effect was created in After Effects with a few different assets. This was actually shot on an iPhone 15 Pro, so let's get into it. I work with log footage a lot, so you're going to want to put a levels effect on it just so that we have more detail to get a solid 3D track. Then after that, hit the 3D track button and wait until your 3D tracker is done getting the points you need for the scene. Now when that's complete, I want you to find some points on the floor near where your talent is and create a solid and just track through the scene, maybe create a couple of solids and just move through the scene and make sure that those solids are set in place. So this is where we're going to put the assets when we're creating the charge so that it looks like it's moving with the scene. And as always, we got to rotoscope out our person. We only rotoscoped out his left arm because we want the energy asset to be behind it to add some depth inside the scene. So just follow what I'm doing and you'll kind of catch on to what it is that I'm trying to accomplish. And add a key cleaner effect on it just so that we can clean up the edges a lot more. So the next thing I did was I went into Film Riot's electricity package and I started playing around with what I believe was the arcs and just placing them where I thought would be pretty cool, because when I see a lot of these charge ups happen, not only in Dragon Ball Z but in animes, usually there's some kind of electricity or disbursement of energy that happens. So I just used that with the track data and then just keyframed it where I needed to if necessary. It just depends on your scene, but just take your time with this and find what works and play it back to see if it fits into the scene. To create what looks like the energy pulling in like those wisps, it was actually some pretty dope assets I found off of Footage Crate. Shout out to them. If you don't have their stuff, you're sleeping. But I pretty much made them 3D layers and then keyframed the position, the rotation, the scale of it to kind of match what the scene and where the hand was going as it was charging up. I think this is a really cool asset because it emulates what looks like energy gathering, which is what you're kind of looking for when something's charging up. So I definitely say that you guys go and check out this asset specifically. And if you message me on Instagram, I can also send you some stuff so that you can see exactly what I did to make this work. But again, just add that, put it into a screen blending mode and put the different assets in different places so that you guys can see what works. But yeah, this is how I made this effect. I also did take a couple of Film Riot's energy assets and I actually reversed it so it looked like the energy was gathering. This is just to add some more depth in the scene because I didn't want it to look too bland, and I thought this looked pretty cool. So I mean, you can try it, you can use a different asset, but I felt like this is pretty neat to show energy gathering along with the other asset. So once we're done getting all of the assets where we think they should be and just kind of like manipulating it a bit, we want to select everything, duplicating the 3D track and a copy of your roto, and just pre-comp everything together so that we can move on to the next step, which is kind of like adjusting and making things look better. And once you make it a pre-comp, I want you to add the solid composite effect on it and change its mode to black instead. And this just helps fill out the whole entire frame so that in case we put things like glows or other effects, it's not confined by the bounds of the footage that came before it. And once you put it into a screen blending mode, it actually helps it so that it gets rid of the blacks inside of the footage. So, but once you're in that pre-comp, I want you to add a fill effect to the arm and make it black. And this is what's going to make it so that we can add the depth to the assets, but we can also add a glow and it will wrap around your subject once you're back in your main comp. This is a really neat trick. Definitely apply this to a lot of other things that you're doing. Once you turn it to screen blending mode, you should have it look like this. And the next thing that we did was add a tint effect, and this is so that we can make it black and white. So now that all the colors are neutral, we can start adjusting it to make it all look more cohesive once we start adding effects to it. From there, you can add a glow. You can use any glow really, but I used optical glow from Red Giant, and just adjust the values until you find something that really works. And remember, I'm working with log footage, so blowing out your highlights a lot is not a good idea because when you get to color grading and stuff, your highlights are going to be way blown out. So remember, like I said, we just adjust things as we go to fit, and then we put a pre-grade layer on top so that we can kind of get a good idea of what the image is actually looking like. But that's further up that you have to worry about it. Now to add some displacement, we duplicated that layer and then renamed it, and this is just to stay organized. Disabled the clip, and then we added an adjustment layer, and from there we added a few different effects to create the displacement on that. The first one was a vector blur, and you can adjust the values for that, but you don't have to go too crazy with it. And then we added a compound blur on top of that, and that's just enough to add a bit of that distortion when the energy is moving around. This is just something creative that most people do, because energy would distort the atmosphere or the things around it. So the next thing we did was add video co-pilots, optical flares to it, and just went through a few different presets and found something that I thought would work. And I went through and adjusted some of the settings, the color being one of them, and then the flicker, and then the timing of it. And once I found something that looked good, I pretty much just put it on screen blending mode and pulled it back into the comp. And I just wasn't liking how the manual track was working with this, so I actually ended up tracking where his hand was and then pick whipping the position of the flare to follow that tracking data. And this is what helped keep it centered in the middle when the flare was moving through the scene. And this just kind of looked way more seamless and good inside of it. So, I mean, yeah, that's a neat little trick you can use if you're having trouble manually tracking it and it doesn't look as good. So when I was done putting the assets where I wanted them to be, I pre-comped the footage all together. And this is where I add my shakes and all of, like, let's say the extras to the footage. And as the energy was gathering, I put a few keyframes and just changed around some of the values so that the shake could intensify as the energy was gathering. So there wasn't nothing much excessive to this. It's part of the workflow I show you with all of the other stuff that I do. So yeah, you can copy something like this and use any shake and it should work the same way. And remember, this is pretty much like a copy and paste method where we're using this exact same idea that we did with the last footage. We just didn't have a 3D track. So like I said, we used the tracking data from the finger to put the assets into place where they're going to follow the hand as it moves. And if it's not moving accordingly, just make sure that you keyframe the position of those assets individually so that it starts to move properly with the hand as you go along, because that's what I had to do for a few of these instances inside of the shot. And like I said, rotoscope the arm so that you can put the energy assets behind the hand that's in front. And then again, the same thing with the assets that I did with the electricity and stuff. This is just a rinse, lather, repeat, so I won't go too deep into it and become repetitive, but I use the exact same process so that I can get the energy to look similar to what I did in the first scene for this shot. Now, this energy ball that you see was actually from Make Big Films, and it was something I thought looked good for the scene and what I was trying to do. So as the energy was gathering and got to the point where I thought it should be emitting and now the energy ball should be formed, I just put this asset in place and put it into a screen blending mode. And to change the colors to match, we did the same thing with adding the tint, the glow, or color vibrance effect, whatever you need to, because it just makes it easier to match it into the scenes. But because we're pre-comping everything together, what you want to do is get things to where they need to be. And then after we're done with the pre-comp, we come back into it and then we neutralize all of the colors so that we can blend it together properly. But again, this is pretty much a rinse, lather, repeat process that we're using with the fill on black inside the pre-comp and then duplicating those settings so that you can put them in there so that you can create this effect. So just follow the exact same idea that I gave you on the last one, and creating this part of the shot will be exactly similar to it. But like I said, this is a great asset from Make Big Films, and it's definitely something you should get your hands on because I think it works great with this scene. The trick for how I made this actually look like it forms quickly was actually cheating it, and we do this in a lot of shots. So pre-comp everything together, and once it's pre-comp together, we're going to go into that main comp again, and we're going to put some cool stuff in place to make this effect sell itself better. So the first thing you're going to do is add an adjustment layer, and on that adjustment layer, I want you to put the Find Edges effect, and we're going to keyframe the inversion of it only for 1 or 2 frames so that there's a flash before the energy actually forms. Then I want you to add the CC light burst effect, and we're going to just change around a few of those values too, so it looks like there's a radial blur that emulates the light pushing outwards as the energy actually forms. And this is a great way to make the energy look like it forms very quickly without it being very noticeable either. And now when you go back into the final pre-comp, I use Production Crate's shake script, and I just use the Jolt 3, and as the energy forms inside of the footage, we just hit the Jolt button, and this adds a bit of a shake, and this kind of distracts people from really like watching where the energy forms. But it's also a good way of selling the effect of the energy actually forming. And if you do it properly, you should have something that looks very similar to this that I'm showing you on the screen. So just try it out, finesse it a bit, but it should get you exactly the same result, if not just a tad bit different. The other thing I added was a heat distortion effect, and put a mask on that adjustment layer, feather it out with the expansion, and play around with the values on the distortion and the heat amount so that you can get this really cool distortion that happens once the energy is actually formed. And this is another big part of what sells your effect. They're very small things, but like I said, take your time and finesse it, going back and forth in between each pre-comp so that you can find what's working for your scene. scene. Follow the method, but you'll get your own result is what I'm saying. And this last shot was really tricky, so we actually had to end up rotoscoping not only one of the hands, but the second hand also inside of the footage. And because he turns over and the hand overlaps on the body, we had to figure out like a bit of a trick to make the energy look like it passed through without making it look really obvious and corny. So there was a little trick that I used to do this. So once we brought the energy layer in, we actually placed it in between the hands, and then we'd turn down the opacity on one over the other and just size it until it fit into the scene properly. And as his hand overlapped when we were keyframing the position, we keyframed the opacity of one of the hands to go down as the other was overlapping to make it look like the energy was actually staying in front of one hand or going behind the other as he was changing positions. This is what helped us actually sell this in the frame, but because it's so quick and it's happening within only a few frames, you're not really going to notice all of this, but you still want to make sure that you make it look the best that you can so that it's not obvious once it actually happens. And again, to make this all work together, to get the glow to wrap around it, we added that black fill effect, like I said before, on both the hands, and keyframed the opacity of one and the other as it was passing by, so that when we added the glow, it wrapped around him and the body inside of the scene and made it look a little more seamless before the energy blast happened. To initiate the blast for the beam, we actually used the optical flares effect again and put the flicker on one more time and just put it in front of him inside of that footage to make it look like the light was actually flickering and emulating some kind of like flare as the energy was being dispersed into the air. So this is just one part of how we sold the effect. Then we copy and pasted the fine edges and CC light burst effect we did with the adjustment layers on this one before the blast occurred. And like I said, this is a good cheat to help sell that effect again. Another little bit that we used was creates God rays, and we put this in an adjustment layer on top, and this is what just helped add that light kind of pushing back and wrapping around the person when the energy beam is let off inside of the air. Like I said, again, another little cheat that you can use to kind of make this all look like it's wrapping together, and it actually makes it look like there's more force and velocity being pushed back from the energy once he releases it. But there was one more step that we added. To make it look a little better, we added some embers to the scene to make it look like there's some debris, particles, or energy being pushed back from the blast in the background, and then we just duplicated that and added some in front of him and at the back. And these are just small little things, paying attention to details, that makes it look a lot better once it's done. And for the last part where you guys see the beam, it was actually Film Riot's extinction package, and these are for the gun blast. We just changed it to a 3D layer, scaled it, rotated it, and put it into the same perspective that the blast would be going, and then just tracked it onto the scene manually to make it look like the energy was being released into the air. And I think this is a really cool way to kind of make it look like it was all coming together. And like I said, once you pre-comp it all together and you change things like the curves and the values and stuff, we were able to make all the colors kind of blend together and make the blast look like it was a little more legit. I mean, you can go deeper into this. You can probably use CC Particle World or something, but this is how I did it quickly in After Effects. And the last thing that I did was just play around inside the pre-comps, readjusting different things like the curves, the values, the scaling, the positioning, and taking things in and out that I thought just didn't fit into the scene. But the last thing that I did do was add some kind of dust assets, because the blowback from energy would be releasing dust on the floor. And once I found the assets that I thought were good from an Action Essentials package, I put them in there and just kind of played with it and tweaked it a bit until I found something that would work, putting stuff in front, putting stuff in the back, and then, like I said, just playing around with it until I found something that would work. And as always, like I keep telling you guys, this is for me to show you guys the techniques I'm using, but for you to interpret the way that you want to try and get something similar inside of the scenes that you're doing. And if you guys need any help with it, just let me know, and I can be more specific if you put a comment down below. So if you guys like this and you enjoyed this tutorial, remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share with someone that cares, and get out there and go and shoot, go create. I don't care if you got an iPhone, I don't care if you got the best camera in the world. It's not the car, it's the driver. It's not the camera, it's the user. So get out there and create. Peace. See you on the next one.